I was 6, maybe 7 years old when this happened. My family had just gotten back from visiting my aunt's house. My cousins were watching a scary movie in the basement, and even though my parents said I would get scared, I snuck downstairs and watched some of it. I don't remember what part I saw, but there were little monsters with teeth that would eat people in their sleep. When we left for home, it was dark outside and my parents scolded me for watching that movie. I secretly hoped they would keep scolding me because I was feeling sleepy and I didn't want those things to eat me. We got home fine and my parents even managed to calm me down enough to the point where when my bedtime came around I could go to sleep. I fell asleep almost immediately and slept pretty well. I woke up sometime during the night. Knowing where everything in my house, I didn't turn on the light, but instead used the street light coming in the windows. I went to the bathroom and then got a glass of water. As I was putting the glass in the dishwasher, something pricked my hand. I pulled my hand back and switched on the lights, but there was nothing in the dishwasher. I looked at my hand and it had 4 little indents on the top and bottom where something had broken through the skin. Since that day, I've had little bumps on my skin where the marks were, and I always remember to turn the lights on. When my wife and I bought our first house, an old Victorian style built in the 50s, almost every night we heard what sounded like a kid's footsteps running down the upstairs hallway, and other random sounds. My wife mentioned it to one of our neighbors, and they said it was probably just peacocks on the roof. The house backed up to a conservation area where wild peacocks lived, and they would occasionally get up on the rooftops. That answer made sense, so we basically got used to it, and eventually ignored it. Less than a year later, our son was born, and when he was 1, he would balance all his toys on top of other toys and made them spin. Literally found the center of balance of various toys and would walk in a circle around the room, giving each a gentle touch to keep it rotating. It was the weirdest and coolest thing I had ever seen. When he was 2 or 3, we would hear him talking in his room at night, and one night I asked who he was talking to. He said, "Tracy." I asked who was Tracy, and he says, "The girl who lives in the wall. She's usually nice, but sometimes she scares me." He described a girl with brown hair and a yellow dress who would play with him sometimes and occasionally wake him up at night, but he didn't seem bothered by any of it, just startled sometimes. He would talk about her once in a while, but it wasn't a common occurrence. A couple years later, we had added on to the house and moved the master bedroom downstairs, switching the kids' room around. Our youngest was now in his old room and about ready to transition from crib to toddler bed. She had always been a sound sleeper, but she cried almost every night in that room. Her first night in the toddler bed, we heard a loud thud, followed by screaming, and rushed into the room, thinking she had fallen out of bed. She was on the other side of the room. We got her calmed down and back to bed, and it happened again the next night, so we ended up switching the kids' room back, and they were fine. We looked up the history of the house, but didn't find anything about any missing little girls or anyone with the name Tracy that had lived there. Eventually our son stopped talking about her, and a few years later I ended up taking a job with another company and we moved. The house was empty for a few months after we moved, and the neighbors across the street called my wife one day. Said about a week after we left she thought she saw our daughter looking out the window, so she waved to her. And then she remembered we didn't live there anymore. A 16-year-old boy worked on his grandfather's horse farm. One morning he drove a pickup truck into town on an errand. While he was walking along Main Street, he saw Death. Death beckoned him. The boy drove back to the farm as fast as he could and told his grandfather what had happened. "Lend me the truck," he begged. "I'll go into the city. He won't find me there." His grandfather lent him the truck, and the boy sped away. After he left, his grandfather went into town looking for Death. When he found him, he asked, "Why did you frighten my grandson that way? He's only 16. He is too young to die." "I'm sorry about that," said Death. "I did not mean to beckon to him, but I was surprised to see him here. I have an appointment with him this afternoon in the city." While Ruth slept, a spider crawled across her face. It stopped for several minutes on her left cheek, then went on its way. "What is this red spot on my cheek?" she asked her mother the next morning. "It looks like a spider bite," her mother said. "It'll go away, just don't scratch it." Soon, the small red spot grew into a small red boil. "Look at it now," Ruth said. "It's getting bigger." "Well, that sometimes happens," her mother said. "It's coming to a head, and in a few days the boil was even larger." "Look at it now," Ruth said. "It hurts and it's ugly." "We'll have the doctor look at it," her mother said. "Maybe it's infected." But the doctor could not see Ruth until the next day. That night, Ruth took a bath. As she soaked herself, the boil burst. Out poured a swarm of tiny spiders from the eggs their mother had laid in her cheek. In a small town of Georgia, there was an old man who had no legs. The only way he could move around was by dragging himself around by his long nails. He would sneak around the town and kill people with his nails. So because of this, the people were ordered to go inside at exactly 6 p.m. and lock their doors until he was caught. One night, a little girl asked her mom if she could go play at her friend's house. The mother looked at the clock. It was 4 p.m. She told the little girl to be home by 5:45 because that's when Click Click came out. The little girl agreed and was on her way. She played and played but lost track of time because when she headed home, it was already 5:48. By the time she was close to her house, it was 6 p.m. She observed people locking their doors and calling in their kids. "Shoot, I'd better run," she thought. Finally, she reached her street, but that's when she heard the noise. Click, click, drag. Click, click, drag. It got louder and louder. She turned around and there he was. Click, clack. She ran to her front door. Click, clack, drag. Click, clack, drag. She pounded on the door, but her mother had fallen asleep. Click, clack, drag. Click, clack, drag. The pounding stopped. Upon waking and forgetting that her daughter had gone out to play the last evening, Mother opened the door to get her newspaper. She screamed in horror at the sight. Written on the steps in blood was, "Mother, why didn't you open the door?" She was never seen again. A young man and his wife were on a trip to visit his mother. Usually they arrive in time for supper. They'd gotten a late start and now it was getting dark. They decided to look for a place to stay overnight and go in the morning. Just off the road they saw a small house in the woods. "Maybe they rent rooms," the wife said, so they stopped to ask. An elderly man and woman came to the door. They didn't rent rooms, they said, but they would be glad to have them stay overnight as their guests. They had plenty of room and they would enjoy the company. The old woman made coffee, brought out some cake, and the four of them talked for a while. Then the young couple were taken to their room. They explained that they wanted to pay for this, but the old man said he would not accept any money. The young couple got up early the next morning before their host had awakened. On the table near the front door, they left an envelope with some money in it for the room. Then they went on to the next town. They stopped at a restaurant and had breakfast. When they told the owner where they had stayed, he was shocked. "That can't be," he said. "That house burned down to the ground 10 years ago. The old man and woman who lived there died in the fire." The young couple couldn't believe it, so they went back to the house. Only now there was no house. All they found was a burnt-out shell. They stood staring at the ruins, trying to understand what happened. Then the woman started screaming. In the rubble was a badly burned table. On the table was the envelope they had left there that morning. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you'd like to, you can follow me at Twitter. The handle is @FuzzyPantaloons, and I'll see you all next time.